Hey there, and welcome to Family Revenge. We're so glad you're here. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you can stay with us for every twist and turn. Let's jump right in. I stood in the hotel foyer, my bouquet in hand, the weight of my military uniform settling around me. The polished floor gleamed under the soft light, and the sound of violins floated in from the next room. Guests murmured in the hall, waiting. Ethan waited at the altar, but there was something else buzzing in my pocket, a message. I pulled my phone out, already knowing who it was from, my father. "I'm not coming. You've ruined everything." I stared at the screen for what felt like forever. The message was short, blunt, and cold. I could feel the years of rejection, the weight of his disappointment crashing over me, even though I'd long since stopped expecting anything from him. This wasn't new, but it always hurt. It always stung. Ethan noticed. I saw him from the corner of my eye, stepping closer, his expression unreadable. He didn't ask what was wrong. He just reached out, gently taking the phone from my hand. I stood there, still processing. He read the text quickly, his eyes flicking back up to mine. Then, without hesitation, he gave a small, reassuring smile. "Give it 2 hours," he said, his voice calm. "Focus on today." I blinked, thrown by his composure. My whole body was still tight with the sting of my father's words, and here he was, telling me to let it go. For now. I looked at him, unsure. But I trusted him. I didn't want to ruin this. Not now. 2 hours, I repeated, nodding. He held out his arm and I took it, knowing I'd follow his lead, even if part of me was still torn. The music swelled in the background as we moved toward the doors. The rest of the world would have to wait. Today was about me, about us. Even if I didn't feel entirely sure of what I was walking into. The doors opened and I stepped into the hallway. A murmur of surprise swept through the guests. The violins faltered for a second before picking back up again. I didn't look at them, didn't care about the stairs. My boots clicked sharply on the marble floor, the sound loud in the otherwise quiet space. I kept my head high, the weight of my military dress uniform heavy but grounding. The fabric felt familiar, the way the sharp edges of the jacket lined up with my shoulders, the decorations of medals and insignia against the dark green. This was me. This was who I'd fought to be. It wasn't a gown or a tradition, but it was mine. I heard the whispers as I walked, felt the discomfort radiating from some of the guests. More than a few raised eyebrows, a couple of hushed voices trying to figure out what to make of it. The tightness in my chest was familiar too, but this time, it wasn't fear. It was defiance. Every step I took was a refusal to be what others expected me to be, especially my father. When I reached the front, Ethan's face softened. His blue eyes didn't flinch, didn't look me up and down the way the others did. He just held out his hand, like he always had, and I took it. "God, you look incredible," he whispered, his voice low enough for only me to hear. I gave him a small smile, though I could feel the tension in my jaw. "You're not the one getting judged right now." He laughed quietly, the sound a little nervous. He knew it wasn't about him. It was about me, about this moment, about what I was choosing to show the world. The officiant cleared his throat, bringing our attention back to the ceremony. It was supposed to be a formality, but every word felt too loud in my ears. I didn't care about the vows themselves. We'd already promised each other everything we needed to. What mattered was this. Ethan's hand was warm, steady in mine. His touch reminded me of the long road I'd taken to get here, all the years I'd spent carving out a place for myself in a world that never wanted me. I'd fought for this moment, just like I'd fought for everything else. The vows were simple, as I knew they would be. We didn't need to speak the grand promises that others might have. What mattered was that we both understood the gravity of this decision, and we both knew how hard it had been to get to this point. I could feel the years of struggle in his grip, the shared understanding between us that we'd fought for each other, fought for this future. When it was time to kiss, it wasn't grand or dramatic. It was just us. The world outside fell away, and for a moment there was nothing but the quiet pressure of his lips on mine, a promise of respect and understanding that we had never fully articulated but had always known. I closed my eyes, letting the world blur around us, letting the quiet moment of validation wash over me. Here, in this space, I wasn't my father's disappointment. I wasn't anyone's expectations. I was just Sarah, and that was enough. The reception buzzed around us, laughter and clinking glasses filling the air. But as I stood there, my hand still resting in Ethan's, I couldn't shake the weight of what had happened earlier. The sound of my phone vibrating on the table caught my attention, the screen lighting up with a flood of notifications. 58 missed calls, all from him. I didn't need to check to know it was my father. His name stared back at me, bold and demanding, just like him. I swiped the screen open, but I didn't tap on any of the calls. I just stared at the number, my chest tightening. 58? Ethan asked softly, leaning in a little closer, his voice low so no one else could hear. Yeah, I muttered, feeling the knot in my stomach tighten. It's him. Ethan didn't need to ask more. He saw the effect it had on me, and he knew better than to pry. Instead, he gave me that look, the same calm expression that I had seen so many times before, the one that said, I've got this. Just breathe. He placed a hand on my arm. Take a minute if you need it. I'll handle the rest. We've got the time. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I wanted the time. What was I supposed to do with it? Let the weight of his absence hang over me the rest of the night? Let his rejection stain this moment? The thought made my stomach twist. But Ethan was already moving, stepping away to make a call, and I was left standing there, holding my phone and thinking about what my father's calls really meant. I glanced down at the screen again. It felt like he was calling to fill the silence between us, to reach out, to claim a piece of me that I hadn't given him in years. I could hear his voice in my head, even though I hadn't heard it in months. Why are you making this so difficult, Sarah? You've got to grow up. Be what I need you to be. That was how it always was with him. Always pushing, always demanding I follow his vision of success. His version of me, the lawyer's daughter, the one who would follow in his footsteps, make the connections, take his place in his perfect little world. But I didn't fit in that world. I never had. I remembered the day I told him I was enlisting, the way his face had twisted with disappointment, the shock in his eyes when I told him I wasn't going to law school, that I wasn't going to follow his path. The argument had been brutal. He'd yelled, called me every name under the sun, but I'd held firm. I was tired of living for him. I was done. That was the moment I had chosen myself. The clink of a glass from the other side of the room pulled me back to the present. Ethan was on the phone, his back to me as he spoke in hushed tones to whoever was on the other line. I didn't know who it was, but I could guess. He had connections. He always had a way of making things happen, even if they weren't conventional. I turned my attention back to the phone in my hand. I wasn't going to call him. Not now, not tonight. I'd learned that much from all the years of trying. Instead, my thumb scrolled through the feed, and my eyes stopped on a headline. Military hero receives Bronze Star for heroic actions. It was my name, my picture. The story I never thought would be told. Not like this. I'd earned that recognition in a way my father never could understand. I'd fought for every medal, for every achievement, every battle that had led me here. I'd never wanted to prove anything to anyone but myself. But now the world was seeing it, seeing me, even if he never would. I let out a breath, the tightness in my chest easing just a little. It wasn't a victory over him, but it felt like validation, a quiet kind of vindication. Ethan hung up the phone and turned back to me, his face calm, like he knew what I'd been thinking, like he understood without me saying a word. You all right? He asked. I nodded, a small, genuine smile forming on my lips. Yeah, I think I am. The reception carried on downstairs, but I wasn't ready to face it yet. Ethan and I slipped away to the bridal suite, and I closed the door behind us, leaning against it for a moment. The walls were decorated with soft, romantic tones, but the sting of my father's rejection still hung heavy in the air. I just needed a minute to breathe. Ethan moved to the small sitting area by the window, a quiet murmur of satisfaction in his tone as he checked his phone. By the way, he said, glancing up at me, the story's live. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard him correctly. What story? The one about you, he said casually, tapping the screen and holding it out toward me. The military stuff, your Bronze Star, your actions in combat. A friend of mine at a news outlet pushed it forward, wanted to make sure the truth was out there finally. I took the phone, staring at the headline, Military Hero Receives Bronze Star for Heroic Actions. My face stared back at me, steady and determined, a photo taken somewhere in the field, probably from one of the rare moments when I let someone snap a picture. Jesus, I muttered, not sure what to feel. The article was long, detailing everything from the combat situations to the medals I'd earned along the way. It was all there, my career, my sacrifices. Everything I'd worked for was suddenly laid bare for the world to see. Ethan sat down, leaning back on the couch, watching me. You don't have to feel anything about it right now, he said softly, but I think you should take a minute to let it sink in. This is you, Sarah. not what anyone else tried to make you, not what your father thought you were going to be. You did this. I swallowed hard. Part of me felt like I'd been caught off guard, like this was too much, too fast. I hadn't signed up for this kind of exposure. Hell, I'd never wanted to be a public figure. The people I cared about knew who I was. That should have been enough, right? But I couldn't ignore it. The truth was finally out there, no longer just buried in the shadows of my career. People were reading about what I'd done. My father wasn't, of course. But that wasn't the point anymore. I set the phone down beside me and took a long breath. I don't know how to feel about this, I admitted, my voice quiet, unsure. It's like, all these years, I've kept this part of me hidden. And now it's just out there. It's too much. Ethan was quiet for a beat, letting the words settle between us. You don't have to like it, but it's happening, and you don't have to hide anymore. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. You've earned every ounce of this, Sarah, and I think, deep down, you know that. I felt something shift in my chest, a tightness loosening. His words were simple, but they cut through the noise of my doubts. Ethan had always been steady. His calm, no-nonsense support had been one of the few constants in my life. And now, more than ever, I needed it. I picked up my phone again, scrolling through the reactions. Comments flooded in, along with messages from people I'd served with, some congratulating me, some just offering words of support. Then there was a text from my commanding officer, publicly praising my actions and leadership. The recognition, though unexpected, felt like a weight lifting. But there was something else, something deeper, hidden between the lines of the text threads. I saw my father's name pop up again in the missed call list. 58 calls and now a text from him too. I see what you've done, but it's too late to fix this. I exhaled slowly, the realization settling in. I didn't need his approval, not anymore. I'd spent too many years trying to win it, trying to meet his expectations. And now here I was, my career, my identity, finally seen by others, even if he never would. Ethan watched me as I leaned back against the chair, his eyes steady, understanding. It's not just about him, is it? He asked quietly. No, I said, my voice firm. It's not. For the first time in a long time, I felt a shift inside me, like the world could see who I really was, and that was enough. Ethan gave me a small smile, his gaze full of something that felt like reassurance. You've got this, he said, as though it was the simplest thing in the world. I nodded, finally feeling a quiet peace settle over me. This was my moment. And no matter what my father thought, I knew the world was starting to see me for who I truly was. The next morning, the weight of the wedding, my father's absence, and the shock of the public recognition still pressed on me. I hadn't even made it downstairs yet when my phone buzzed, a voicemail alert lighting up the screen. I stared at it, then clicked play. Hey, it's your father. I know I haven't been the best at this. I'm sorry, Sarah. His voice was thick, strained, like he was forcing the words out, but it was still his familiar tone, the one that always carried an edge of control, even when it cracked. I know I don't have a right to ask for anything, but I think we should talk. Please, can we meet? I sat there, frozen, my father apologizing. It wasn't what I expected. He'd never sounded that vulnerable before. But it didn't matter. Not now. Ethan had just come into the room when the voicemail ended. He saw my expression and nodded. You gonna call him back? I shook my head, running my fingers through my hair. I don't know. I'm not ready to just forget everything. This apology, it's too little. Too late. I get it, he said, his voice steady, but his eyes didn't leave mine. But this could be your chance to set some boundaries, to take control of it, not him. What do you need from him, if anything? The question hung in the air, and I didn't have an answer right away. But after a moment, I realized I had one. Nothing. I didn't need his approval anymore, not for this life I'd built. But maybe it was time to face him, to get this final piece of the puzzle and then close it for good. Fine, I said. I'll meet him. But I'm setting the terms. Ethan smiled faintly, like he knew I was already coming to that conclusion. You've got this. The cafe was small, quiet, the kind of place where the clink of coffee cups was the loudest noise. I had insisted on meeting here, not his office, not some restaurant where he could try to control the narrative. It had to be neutral ground. No suits, no power plays, just the two of us. When I walked in, he was already sitting at a corner table, his back slightly hunched, his hands folded in front of him. He looked smaller than I remembered, more frail, even though his sharp suit still clung to him like armor. His hair was thinner, his face drawn, the lines of age deeper than I'd noticed before. When he saw me, he stood, but didn't move any closer. We just stared at each other for a second. I didn't know what I expected, but it wasn't this worn out man who suddenly seemed so out of place in his own life. Sarah, he said, his voice cracking slightly, I I was wrong about you, about your career, about everything. I don't know how to fix it, but I wanted you to know that I see it now. What you've done, it's impressive. I should have supported you. I didn't sit. I didn't need to. I didn't want to make this comfortable. You're right, I said, my voice steady but cutting through the tension. You were wrong. But I'm not here to talk about your guilt or your regret, because it's too late for that. His eyes flickered, the first sign of the man I used to know trying to break through. I know I've hurt you, Sarah. I'm sorry for that. I Stop, I interrupted, holding up a hand. I don't need your apology, not anymore. I don't need anything from you, Dad. I've built a life without you, and I'm proud of it. I don't want your approval. I never did. You've made it clear where you stand, and I've learned to live without it. I'm here because you asked to meet, but that's it. He didn't respond right away. His mouth opened like he was going to say something, but then he closed it. There was no more fire in him, no more dominance, just exhaustion. I never wanted to disappoint you, he said quietly, and yet you did, over and over. I let the words hang there. I wasn't going to sugarcoat it. I wasn't going to pretend that all these years of him demanding I fit into his mold hadn't hurt, that I wasn't tired of pretending that his vision for me mattered. But I'm done, Dad, done trying to live up to something that was never meant for me. He stared at me for a long time, the silence thick between us. I could see the struggle on his face, but I couldn't bring myself to soften. Not now. Not when I'd spent so many years hoping for this moment and realizing I didn't need it anymore. Finally, he nodded slowly. I get it. I really do. But I don't want you to think I don't care. I stood, letting the finality of the movement sink in. I know you don't, but I'm not the daughter you wanted. I'm the daughter I became, and that's enough for me. I paused, a weight lifting from my chest, the air feeling a little clearer. I'm done. I turned and walked out of the cafe, the door closing softly behind me. I didn't look back. It didn't take long for the stories to spread. My name started showing up more frequently, headlines in papers, features on the news, articles detailing my Bronze Star, the work I'd done in combat, the leadership I'd shown. It wasn't exactly the fame I'd ever wanted, but it was recognition. And for the first time, it wasn't just about my military service. It was about me, Sarah, and what I'd accomplished, not who I was supposed to be. Some of the messages I received were expected. Congratulations from old friends, fellow service members, people I'd worked with during deployments. But there were others too, people I hadn't spoken to in years. My father's former colleagues, many of whom were quick to offer their support, some even publicly praising me. The irony wasn't lost on me. These people had always been loyal to him, always stood by his side. But now, with the tide turning, they were all reaching out, and I couldn't bring myself to care. His name was unraveling in the small town he'd once ruled. No one could ignore it now, not when they saw what I had done. Even if he still couldn't, I let it settle into me, a quiet satisfaction. It wasn't about gloating. It wasn't about him. It was just, finally. A few weeks later, I found myself sitting across from General Harris, my mentor, in the small office where he'd been helping me navigate life after the military. The space felt more like a war room than a counseling office, maps and awards on the walls, an old coffee machine humming in the corner. He leaned back in his chair, studying me for a moment before speaking. I've been thinking about your future, Sarah. You've done a hell of a job in uniform, but now it's time to start shaping the future of those who come after you. I raised an eyebrow, not sure where he was going with this. What do you mean? I'm offering you a position, he said, leaning forward, hands clasped. A real one. Helping veterans transition back into civilian life. The government is revamping their programs, and we need someone like you, someone who's seen the system from the inside. We need your experience to shape policy. You've got the connections. You've got the heart. You've got the grit. I paused, letting the words sink in. This wasn't just another step in the military. This wasn't just another assignment. This was different. This was a chance to make a real impact, not just on the battlefield, but at a larger level. I'm not a policy person, I said, unsure, even though a part of me knew I was ready for something like this. I don't know if I'm qualified. He shook his head, a smile tugging at his lips. You're more qualified than most people I know. You've led. You've fought for people who needed you. That's exactly the kind of perspective we need in this. You'll be helping veterans transition into jobs, education, and lives beyond the service. You'll have the power to reshape the system from the inside, Sarah. The weight of it hit me. I'd spent so long fighting to prove myself in the military, battling for every ounce of recognition. But this was different. This was shaping something bigger than myself. It felt like a turning point. Okay, I said, slowly nodding. I'm in. Harris grinned, a rare look of pride crossing his face. Good, because the next generation is counting on people like you. They need leaders who know what the hell they're doing. And you're exactly that. As I settled into my new role, things started to fall into place. The work was challenging, but it felt right. I wasn't just proving I could survive anymore. I was shaping policy, making sure the people who'd served alongside me, and those who would come after, would have the resources and support they needed when they came home. It was one thing to fight in a war, but it was another to help people navigate life after. The more I worked, the more I realized how much I wanted to be a part of this. It wasn't just about veterans, it was about people, helping them find their way, giving them the tools to build a life after everything they'd sacrificed. I'd been given that chance myself, even if I hadn't realized it at the time. Every day, I saw the difference I could make. And for the first time, I felt like I was where I was supposed to be. Not fighting to be seen, not waiting for approval, but living in the life I had created for myself. It had been weeks since I'd last heard from him, but that morning, his name flashed across my phone. For a moment, I just stared at it, unsure. My finger hovered over the screen, torn between curiosity and the knot in my stomach that had never quite loosened. But I wasn't going to let fear make this decision for me. I swiped to answer. Hello? Sarah? My father's voice crackled through, thinner than I remembered. I could hear the tremor in it, and it hit me harder than I expected. It's me, your father. The silence stretched between us for a second. I almost hung up right then, but something held me there, some part of me wanting to hear this, whatever it was he had to say. I know it's been a while, he continued, his voice strained. I've been thinking a lot about everything, about what you've done. And I was wrong. About your choices, about the path you've walked. His words felt like a sudden weight, and I shifted in my seat, taking a slow breath. He was finally saying it, the thing I'd spent years wanting to hear, but it didn't carry the relief I thought it would. Go on, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. My hands were shaking, but I ignored it. I'm sorry, Sarah. I was wrong, and I want you to know, I see you now. I see what you've done, and I respect it. I respect you. I swallowed, forcing myself to absorb his words. This wasn't the apology I had imagined. No grand gestures, no promises to change. Just a simple, cracked admission. But even then, I didn't feel what I thought I'd feel. It wasn't forgiveness, and it wasn't some magical moment of reconciliation. Okay, I said quietly. I hear you. The words felt empty in my mouth. I knew I'd never get the father I wanted. He couldn't give that to me. And that was fine. I don't expect you to forgive me, he said quickly, his voice thick. I just needed to tell you. I see who you are now, and I'm sorry for not seeing it sooner. His apology hung there between us, heavy, but it wasn't a bridge back to anything. I'd moved on a long time ago. His apology, was important, but it didn't define me. It didn't erase the years of silence. It didn't undo the hurt. I don't need you to apologize, I said, my voice firm now. It's taken me a long time to get here. To build my life without your approval, I don't need that anymore. I don't need anything from you except respect. I need honesty, and I need you to understand where I stand now. But that's it. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I could hear him breathing, the weight of the conversation pressing in on him. I understand, he said finally, his voice quieter now. I'll respect your boundaries. I can't change what I've done, but I can try to do better. I can be honest with you. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. That's all I need. Respect and honesty. He sighed, like he was letting go of something heavy. I'll try to do that, Sarah. I won't push anymore. Good, I said, the finality in my voice settling over the conversation. I'm not asking for anything else. And I don't think we need to meet again. I don't think we'll ever be what you wanted us to be, and I'm okay with that. I understand, he said again. And this time, I could hear the acceptance in his voice. A shift had happened, not just in me, but in him too. It wasn't enough for reconciliation, but it was enough for closure. I'll respect that. Goodbye, Dad, I said, already feeling the weight lift as I said the words. Goodbye, Sarah. I hung up before he could say anything else. There was no need for anything more. The conversation had happened, and for the first time in my life, I realized that his absence didn't make me any less whole. I wasn't defined by him anymore. I leaned back in my chair, letting the silence fill the space. The call hadn't been what I thought it would be, but maybe it was exactly what I needed. The invitation to the Defense Women's Leadership Summit sat on my desk for days, the weight of it feeling heavier than I'd expected. I wasn't sure if I was ready to stand in front of a crowd, to be the face of something bigger than I ever thought I'd be, to speak about my journey, the one I'd fought for so long to define on my own terms. It wasn't about the military anymore. It wasn't just about my medals, my deployments, or the uniform. It was about the road I'd walked, the years I'd spent trying to prove that I was worth something, even when the people closest to me didn't believe it. I read the invitation again, the words on the page blurring for a moment as I took a deep breath. Your story has the power to inspire, it said. I wasn't sure if I was ready to let my story be anyone's inspiration. But then I thought about how far I'd come, how much I'd fought to make this moment possible. I wasn't doing it for the people who had doubted me. I wasn't doing it for my father. I was doing it for me. The day of the summit, I stood backstage, my heart thumping in my chest. The auditorium was packed with women, each one a force in her own right, ready to hear the stories of others who had fought the same battles. But none of them had fought my battle. None of them knew the sting of trying to break free from the expectations of someone who should have loved you unconditionally. None of them knew what it was like to walk away from a life that was never yours to begin with. When my name was called, I stepped onto the stage, the bright lights blinding me for a moment. I looked out over the sea of faces, all expectant, all waiting. The words were already in my head, the speech I'd written and rewritten, but in that instant, none of it felt right. The fear started creeping back in. What if they didn't care about my story? What if it didn't matter? I took a breath and pushed through the doubt. Good afternoon, I started, my voice steady, though my heart was still racing. I've spent most of my life trying to prove myself, first to my father, then to my country, and finally to myself. I paused, letting the words hang in the air for a moment. The audience was quiet, hanging on to every word, and for the first time, I felt like I wasn't speaking to them as a soldier. I was speaking to them as a person who had fought against every expectation, every rejection, and every limitation placed on her. I chose the military, not because it was what I was supposed to do, but because it was the only place I felt I could truly be myself. But what I didn't realize was that it wasn't just about serving my country, it was about learning who I was when no one else would tell me. I looked down at my hands, grounding myself. I spent so many years fighting for approval, for recognition. But what I realized, after too much time wasted, was that no one else was ever going to give me that. I had to give it to myself. And that's the hardest lesson I ever learned. The words came easier now, like they'd been waiting to be said. We all have people in our lives who expect things from us. Family, society, the world. And sometimes that can feel like a weight you can never get rid of. But if you don't break free from those expectations, you'll never understand who you really are. I had to walk away from a version of myself that was built on someone else's dreams. And in doing that, I finally found the woman I was meant to be. I felt the audience's eyes on me, felt their energy shift as if they were hearing something that resonated with their own experiences, their own struggles. I'm not here today because of the things I've achieved, I continued. I'm here because I showed up for myself, even when everyone else told me I couldn't. And that's the only thing that matters. You don't need anyone's approval to stand in your truth, not even your father's. The words were out before I even realized they'd come, and I knew I had said what needed to be said. There was a quiet shift in the room, a collective understanding. I wasn't just telling my story anymore, I was giving them permission to tell theirs. The silence that followed felt heavy, but it wasn't uncomfortable, and then suddenly the room erupted in applause. I stood there for a moment, stunned, not sure what to do. The sound of it, the appreciation, it wasn't about the recognition for me, it was about something else. It was about being seen, truly seen, for who I was and what I'd fought for. I scanned the crowd, my gaze settling on the back of the room, where a familiar figure stood, hidden in the shadows. My father. He wasn't there for the applause, but I could see the way he watched me. Silent, still. For the first time, there was no judgment in his eyes, only acknowledgement, a recognition I'd never thought I'd get. I felt a small ache in my chest, but it wasn't pain. It was the soft echo of closure. I didn't need his approval anymore, but knowing he saw me now, really saw me, felt like a quiet kind of redemption. The applause continued, and I stood there, taking it all in, not just for myself, but for every woman in that room who had ever fought to be seen. A few months passed, and things settled into a rhythm. My new role, helping veterans transition back into civilian life, was challenging but fulfilling. Each day brought new challenges, new opportunities to shape the future for those who'd served. I was exactly where I was supposed to be, and I felt the sense of purpose I'd been looking for. One morning, I walked into my office to find an envelope sitting on my desk, its edges crisp and clean. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father's. I hadn't heard from him since that awkward phone call a few months ago. I didn't expect to hear from him again, but there it was, a letter. I opened it slowly, almost hesitating. The first words hit me before I even finished reading the entire letter. Sarah, it began, I've spent a lot of time thinking about the choices I made, the mistakes I've made, and the woman you've become. I've come to realize how much I failed you over the years. I failed to see you for who you were, and I failed to be the father you deserved. I swallowed, letting the words sink in. There was no defensiveness, no shifting blame, just an acknowledgement that had been absent for most of my life. Your accomplishments have shifted my perspective, he continued. Your strength, your courage, they've taught me more than I've taught you. I'm now working with veterans, helping them advocate for themselves in legal settings. I never would have considered this before, but I see now how much they need someone who understands their struggle. Thank you for showing me what truly matters. I sat back in my chair, the letter crumpled slightly in my hands. My father, was teaching veterans now, helping them stand up for themselves. It was strange to think that the man who had always pushed me to follow his path, to fit into a life I never wanted, had finally stepped outside his own world to learn something new. He was learning, growing, and for the first time, it felt like something real, something genuine. I didn't need to respond. The letter itself was enough. It wasn't a magical fix, but it was closure. It was the acknowledgement I'd always wanted, but had long since stopped needing. I folded the letter carefully and placed it in my drawer. The past was the past, and I didn't need to keep it open anymore. As I looked out the window, watching the world move by, I felt a quiet peace settle over me. My life had never been about fixing anything or waiting for approval. It had been about creating something real, something that was true to who I was. I had built a life on my own terms, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. I knew my father had come a long way, and maybe we'd talk again one day. But for now, I was content. Not because everything was fixed, but because I was at peace with where I was, with the choices I had made. I didn't need anyone else's validation. I was enough on my own. I stood up, ready to get back to work. The future was still unwritten, but for the first time, I felt like it was mine to shape, and that was all I needed.